Good evening. This is Mark McNaught. I'm an associate professor of American Studies, Law, and Political Science at the University of Rennes in Brittany, France. And this is the first of a series of podcasts that I'll be doing about a written constitution for a Scottish secular republic. This is something that I've been focusing on for quite some time. Just to give you a little bit of about my experience prior to the referendum in 2014, and from 2012 to 2014, I wrote a series of articles in Newsnet Scotland about the possibilities of what could be included in a written Scottish constitution. Unfortunately, the result of the 2014 referendum was such that these ideas could not be employed. However, in 2016, I spent 3 months in Catalonia, and I had the pleasure to work with a group of people named Constituïm, who drafted a constitution for a Catalan republic, and I had the great pleasure to help them to translate that into English, and so getting a lot of ideas from that as well. More broadly, my studies have been in American politics, American constitutional law, and so I've seen, I've studied that, issue quite a lot, and coming at it from a perspective of how could things be done differently, and how could a constitution be better drafted, especially now, with knowing what we know and with more modern ideas. How could that be drafted? Now, the United States Constitution, in my view, is no longer fit for purpose. It should be. There are so many things that they could not have anticipated back in 1789 when the U.S. Constitution was ratified. So the question I would like to begin is if you could have a draft now, if you could draft a new constitution, what would it include to avoid a lot of the pitfalls and a lot of the issues that plague, for example, the American constitutional setup at this point? It's very interesting to reflect on what could be included in a Scottish constitution that could resolve many of the issues that are present in other constitutions and other systems, most notably, for me at least, the United States. So. The first question I'd like to begin to address is, why should we begin this discussion now? There's not been a referendum announced yet, so arguably you could say it's too early, but I would say that given the Brexit deadline coming up within just over a year, we need to begin to discuss what type of form that a new Scottish independent government would take, and what constitutional provisions could be in there. I think we do need to begin to do it now, because once a referendum is called, it's going to be the context is going to be much, much more intense. So it's kind of a quiet before the storm right now, and so we can have a calm discussion before the intensity of a second referendum becomes upon us, and then even more intense if there's a yes vote. All of the special interests and banks and financial institutions, which would be seeking to craft a Scottish government to their advantage and seek to kind of elbow their way into the constitution making process. And so we want to begin our work earlier so that we can be well ahead of the game in terms of ideas of what a constitution could entail. Also, the fact that I'm simply an EU citizen who has an intense interest in Scotland. I'm not part of I'm a member of the SNP, but I'm certainly not a big player in that, or necessarily of the Yes movement. I'm involved in the Yes movement, certainly, but I'm also just a citizen who is very interested in seeing a better country emerge from any independence referendum. So those are why I think we should begin this discussion now, kind of in the calm before the storm, before it becomes much more intense. So the question you want to begin to think about is, what if you could build a state from scratch, a tabula rasa or a blank slate. how would you build it, and how would you build a constitution differently from what from what Scotland currently enjoys under the UK. And so there's all kinds of, I mean, certainly many ideas spring forth, but we want to also first of all speak about why there should be a written constitution. There's many ideas on this, and this is by no means an exhaustive list by any stretch of the imagination. But first of all, a constitution can be a proclamation of collective values. And to say what the country stands for, what the country envisions, equality. Of course, in France, you have the liberty, equality, fraternity as these kind of standard, kind of founding ideals. I'm sure that for Scotland they would be very similar, but there might be other values that Scotland chooses to put forth in any constitution. So certainly that would be an affirmation that a written constitution can affirm these basic values. The second is why a written constitution is a better structuring of the political system. Now, you only have to look at Westminster for about 5 minutes to realize how constitutionally chaotic it is. I mean, in the Brexit debate has emphasized that very clearly. For example, right now they're debating whether or not Theresa May's government should be able to use the Henry VIII powers to basically write vast swaths of legislation without even parliamentary oversight. And one could easily argue that where should they derive those powers from? And with the UK Constitution, it's very much they kind of make it up as they go along from a constitutional point of view. So a written Scottish Constitution could better structure the political system. And also have a more effective separation of powers and what the powers of each branch of government are, being much more precisely defined than they are under the British under the UK state. Another very important thing that could be included in a written constitution is establishing both positive and negative rights, and also making them justiciable. Now, distinguishing the two, negative rights are rights that block the infringement of certain basic rights of the individual. For example, freedom of speech. People should be able to say what they want within the bounds of legitimate discourse. And so the state cannot interfere in that. So it's kind of like a shield, if you will, or freedom of religion. People should be able to, religious practice should be free for everyone, and the state should not be able to infringe on that. So that's a negative right. Positive rights are more rights to things, like whether it's it could be housing, schools, healthcare, all of these things, and these could be guaranteed as positive rights. But very importantly, there needs to be a way of making these rights justiciable, and that they can be affirmed, and redress for violations can be effectively sought without recourse to spending thousands of pounds or euros or whatever it is at that time on lawyers or other and to really bring about greater legal equality in giving access to everyone to the legal system to redress violations of their rights. Okay. So that's just a few ideas on what a constitution could be, and I'll certainly be going into more detail in the episodes to come. Second of all, why a republic? Why should Scotland be a republic? For me, it's a complete no-brainer. I mean, if you were to found a state today, would you have a monarch? No. It seems pretty obvious. And so the main reason that I believe that Scotland should be a republic when they become independent is that there would be true popular sovereignty rather than the sovereignty of the Crown and Parliament. And so, for example, under the UK system, Parliamentary is in the House of Lords, the House of Commons, and in the and in the monarch. It's called parliamentary sovereignty or supremacy. The people don't have sovereignty under this system. I mean, I don't know how many people realize that, but the people are not sovereign. And it was only recently that British people became UK people became citizens rather than subjects. And it's all so you've had this basis of legitimacy of divine right that basically still exists. I mean, it may not be expressed exactly in the same way as before, but you still the UK is still based on divine right, and people are not sovereign. It's the crown in Parliament that is sovereign. And so I think the most fundamental reason for becoming a republic is that that Scots truly have sovereignty themselves, rather than in this UK bizarre system where an old lady and a bunch of dudes wearing vermin and a bunch of people in the House of Commons have sovereignty rather than the people. Second reason there should be a republic, and certainly and I alluded to this before, is to be able to get rid of the monarchy, certainly, and also the feudal aristocracy. And you still got dukes and viscounts and all this stuff, and that's just got to go. I mean, there's no way you can keep that around in an independent Scotland. So I mean, because when you have that, you literally have inequality baked into the UK Constitution. You have the monarch, the princes, the dukes, the earls, all that in this feudal hierarchy that hasn't really changed that much since for hundreds or for centuries. In France, you still have people who have these titles, but they have no. I mean, they can hold the title if they want, but there's no. There's no power that comes out of that, or no position, and so I would argue that France is a more egalitarian society, and part of that is the fact that they were able to get rid of the monarchy and the aristocratic system that had prevailed up before the French Revolution. So again, so going back to popular sovereignty and eliminating the monarchy and the feudal aristocracy would go. Inequality would no longer be baked into the UK Constitution, and there would be a much more egalitarian society. And also the republic, because in order to have I would argue to have a good functioning government, you need an informed citizenry rather than having subjects. And so, I know that, and so learning about Scottish history, learning about civic institutions, that civic education be mandatory for all Scottish students, so they learn about their political system, they learn about how they can be good citizens. I think that's fundamental to helping build a better society over time. And I put in I also believe that it should be a secular republic. And when I say secular, this is it has nothing to do with being anti-religious. Secular means there's no established church. Now, of course, in England, you have the Church of England, and the Queen is the head of the Church of England, and you have the Church of Scotland as well. And sure, I know that very few people actually go to these churches, and that the Scottish government has very little connection with the Church of Scotland. It's different from, for example, in the Westminster Parliament, but there should not be there should not be an established church in an independent Scotland. There should be there should be an equal treatment of all religions and basic state neutrality in regarding the religions, which will allow the freedom of all religions to flourish, and also people can feel free to be secular and non-religious as well, just treating all beliefs equally, but provided they do not incite violence or are somehow upending the societal norms. And I think most importantly, particularly given Scotland's history, is the idea that there should be a better capacity to gradually eliminate sectarianism. And I know that, and you still have, particularly in Glasgow and the west of Scotland, the sectarian divides, and you have Catholics and Protestant schools, And and so it would be very interesting to move towards a much more a much more civically minded educational system that seeks to seeks to get down to break down these sectarian divides and and gradually over time make it so that people are just citizens and not defined by what religion they belong to. And the Constitution is not a panacea. It's not something that's just going to make all of these things occur overnight. However, it can contain the tools by which these things can be achieved over time. So I just want to talk a little bit more about what I plan to do with this project. And so, as I said, I have developed a draft constitution that I've taken from many sources. I don't at all claim to it have been all of my doing, but I will be putting it up on the Independence Live website, and I hope to have a wiki with the help of my technologically minded friends to develop a Wikipedia version. In other words, that people can go to the draft and make suggestions of how it could be changed or how things could be done differently, and get as broad an input as possible into the draft to get as much collective wisdom as possible, and make the best draft possible that, as I said, would at the very least would be made available to any constituent assembly or constitutional convention that would be drafting a permanent constitution. And I think again I think that would be a great success if that was the extent of it. Just that some of the ideas here were adopted, and so some of the things that I'd like to focus on and that I will be further exploring in future drafts that I'd like just to kind of put these seeds out for you to think about. But things, for example, like financial regulation in a constitution. And I have a dear colleague, Jonas, in Greece, and he, for example, made the suggestion that if you in a constitution had the equivalent of Glass-Steagall, now Glass-Steagall is a separation between commercial banks and investment banks, and this was the Glass-Steagall was a New Deal policy in the United States instituted in the 1930s, which led to many decades of stability within the banking system because the commercial and the investment banking were separate, and if you could put and when it was revoked, that's when a lot of the stuff that led to some of the more recent crashes. So having that in a constitution where it could not be changed by normal law would be very interesting. That's just one example. Another one is in the environment, where there be a constitutional requirement that all chemicals, every ingredient of everything has to be listed, whether it's food, whether it's chemicals, whether it's that everything be listed on ingredients, and including things like genetically modified foods. All that has to be labeled if it's to be sold within Scottish borders. And then also environmental monitoring, and just making sure that well into the future that Scots have safe water, safe air, all of these things that are literally absolutely indispensable just for life itself. Another issue would be land reform, and whether or not in a constitution you could simply have in a constitution you could specify that all land within Scottish borders has to be registered and taxed with the Scottish government, because as you probably are aware, much of the Scottish land, people don't even know who owns it. It's often held in offshore companies. It's often held by Saudi sheiks and Daily Mail editors and these other types of folks that don't, and then they don't have to pay taxes because of that. What would be really interesting would be to have a provision in the Constitution that says that unless the land is registered and taxed with Scotland, then it goes into private ownership. So if people don't register and register the land with the Scottish Land Trust, they lose it. That would be interesting. That might get them going on, registering and actually paying taxes and actually contributing to the betterment of Scotland, rather than shipping all their money offshore. So those are just a few ideas and things that I'll be expanding on in the near future. As I said, I plan to have to do about a 20-minute excerpt each week, focusing on a different aspect of a Scottish constitution. And again, I will be seeking to set up a means by which all of you, anyone who wants to, can contribute to the discussion to further refine this draft, and also, maybe, and categories of law. We can talk about the EU. We can talk about talk about anything from a constitutional point of view. I'm always up for a good discussion. And just also, these broadcasts will be just me speaking. But I will also be having other interviews and things where we can get more broad interaction. But I did want to make a constant this 20 or 25 minute clips that I'll be making, just so that I can say what my views on these different subjects. And then you're more than welcome to send me comments or questions that I can address in the other one. But as I said, I will be certainly holding more interviews as well with other, in which we can get more broad participation. Okay, so thank you for listening. I will be back next. I'll be back next week, next Thursday, with another excerpt. But please, tell your friends, share around, and let's get this discussion going on how we build a Scottish secular republic that's worthy of the struggle to become independent. Okay, thank you very much. See you next week.